Okay, welcome back to another very special episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the city of angels. Well, I don't know if people are very angelic these days. Very, very special show indeed. This is something we've been planning for quite some time. You all know I'm an active skydiver. The DB Cooper case has really fascinated me for decades. Even before I first saw it on Unsolved Mysteries, it's always been in my head. And then, of course, the Zodiac Killer case being in California, this has always been something like, who was he? Is he still alive? Why did the trail go cold? And then another thing we'll even touch base is on Jimmy Hoffa. We all know that Tucker Carlson and Fox News is actually spending a lot of time investigating. Well, we found the person who's actually dealing with these cold cases. And I believe he's actually the founder of the Casebreaker. So let me introduce him, the one and only Mr. Thomas Colbert. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dr. J, for having us on. It took us a good year to get together, but now's the right time.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I'm going to start with the DB Cooper first. A lot of people, and I know what you're going to say the answer is, but a lot of people have speculated that the reason this case wasn't given the full attention is because he possibly was an asset, an intelligence asset. And you started to go down the road and you actually confirmed that he was, not only was, but they were protecting him, right?
That's exactly right. And I have to right up front let the audience know that, look, I'm the ringmaster. This team are the Lions and Tigers. I mean, these are 40 members on this team. 10 of them, the leaders, are former FBI. And they don't do as, and when they came on board, Dr. J, they said, we're not going to do legends. We're not going to do folklore. We're just going to do the facts. And here we are in our 10th year with this incredible team, all volunteers, all involved. And they started with Cooper. And yes, that was quite a journey with Cooper. We spent 7 years. We expected to be 3. But when we went to History Channel with our evidence, more than 100 pieces of evidence that we had gathered, suddenly our top 18 pieces of evidence are removed from the show. We saw it that night. And that's when we realized something was up. The next morning, the FBI held a news conference up in Seattle, and they said, we looked at Colbert's team and their evidence, and there's nothing new. We had over 100 pieces of evidence, including DNA, including where he lived. And that's when my wife and I, who being Californians, we do what Californians do, we sued, and we won. After 6 months, we got the Cooper file, and that's when we learned the truth.
Now, you said History Channel was bearing this?
History Channel was they wanted the FBI on the set, and we were okay with that. But what we didn't know, for 6 months, they negotiated out the top 18 pieces of evidence from our case. We didn't know it till it aired. That's when we sued. It took us a half year to get the file. And lo and behold, we find out DB Cooper had 3 veteran partners helping him escape. It's mentioned in the documents. We posted that, and the audience can see up at dbcooper.com at the top of that page. They can look at the 18 pieces of evidence. So we, from that point on, realized something was up. Now, we had met with the FBI, Dr. J, originally, and we said, we have a suspect. It's been brought to us. We'd like to take this case forward with you. And they said, well, we can't be involved, but go ahead. And then we got a contract, literally an email saying, yes, we'll accept circumstantial case, bring us the evidence. Well, we did, over 100 pieces of evidence. And the week we were to turn it in, they slammed the door. And they said, I'm sorry, we're not going to do a circumstantial case. That's when we sued. That's when we found the truth.
This is kind of wrong for them to say they're not going to do circumstantial cases. I mean, we've all seen trials of people who, Scott Peterson, right? Convicted, sent to death, the death penalty, even though there's no more death penalty in California, at least for the time being. Completely circumstantial case. There was nobody that saw him do it. Sure, some of the evidence was pretty damning, like the body of his wife and unborn son were found where he happened to be fishing. The point is circumstantial. And not that movie Fargo, was
Yeah.
not based on what it said it was, but it actually goes back to a case, I believe it was like 87, where a
Correct.
man killed his wife, who
Mhm.
happened to be a flight attendant, and then put her in a wood chipper. That case was the first case in Connecticut history that prosecuted a case circumstantially without a body. So for them to throw this out for that ludicrous reason tells me there was political motivations behind it.
Well, there were a lot of motivations, but it's important to understand that before cameras were mounted in every liquor store
Hmm.
or at the airports, circumstantial was the main way they convicted people.
Yes,
It's not
that's
like
right.
you got me, copper.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was we got to go find them, and so circumstantial was the primary method. And we're dealing with cases 30 to 40 years old right now.
Yep.
And so that's what we focused on. And yes, there was something going on. It had to do with politics. And the politics had to do with the CIA. When what we believe solved the case, we brought the evidence forward and they refused to receive.
Hmm.
That's when we had to go back. And so the team, they put their nose to the grindstone and we worked for the next 3.5 years to find the evidence. We found the parachute.
Hmm.
That was led to us. We also found the coded messages. And by the way, it's the same coded messages that were planted into the D.B. Cooper letters, 6 of them, that the Zodiac used the same book when he was in the Air Force, the same coded messages. And we can talk about that later with Zodiac. But long story short, we found the parachute. We gave it to the FBI in 2017, and they never spoke to us again.
Let me ask you, because we do know this after this case, when they did the search in the Washington, I want to say forest, regardless, the point
Right.
was in the wilderness, they found, I believe, the piece of the airplane. It was like a sign or something near
Correct.
the tailgate. And then years
Mhm.
later, I think it was 84, the money found by the child. But the parachute, why didn't they continue to look for it? And where did you find it? Was it anywhere near where they found not the money that was buried, but where they found the piece of the airplane, the sign? Because that would indicate that's where he landed, essentially.
That was the general area, but what most people don't know is that there were these crime partners had practiced,
Mhm.
and several farmers had seen them practicing on the fields in remote Washington state. And the FBI, while they had all the media cameras in northern Washington, a small group of FBI went south because they heard about the farmers. And during the rain, they were practicing the day before and the day of, and so forth. All that was meticulously set up by these 3 partners to DB Cooper. And that's how it was revealed. The FBI had the information and they didn't admit it until about 1975 at a meeting in San Francisco. And they said, no, we were actually south. We had found where he had landed on the fields, the farmer fields.
I Also, the decade that this crime happened, we didn't have DNA evidence. The
Correct.
closest we had was fingertips and if we could match blood type, right?
And
How
hunches.
and the what
And hunches.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably, for over 150 years, like the number one thing detectives
Yes.
basically used to solve cases. How did they match the parachute? Did it just happen to be the same make model as the one that the airlines gave the 4 parachutes on the airplane?
Well, I will tell you that after we brought 5 pieces of the parachute, it was in a very remote spot. The closest home at that time was 10 miles away.
Hmm.
And we were given very specific directions by a wonderful couple that had received the information, a tip. And they had sat on it for many years until they saw our fight in the courtroom in Washington, D.C. That's when they stepped forward and shared their information. It literally was in a particular curve in a road in a Washington mountain, and you hike in 100 some odd feet, and and there you'll find it. Well, that's where we found it, and we brought them the materials, as I said, to this day they won't confirm. I will tell you how we confirmed it. One of the pieces, when we dug it up, we looked at it, and the audience can see some of these pictures at go to casebreakers.org. At the very bottom of the page, click on DB Cooper. You will see some of the pictures if you go back in the articles. And this looked like a piece of parachute, but it also could be a piece of a potato sack. We didn't know. The beauty of our team of 40 members, I only have met a third of them. They all work in the passion of helping others. And so I called a head of a forensic department right here in Ventura County. And I had permission from the sheriff, and he's an active member, the head of forensics.
Mhm.
And I said, I have a piece of something that's a potato sack or it's a parachute. How do I figure it out? He goes, do you have a match? And I said, yeah. He says, take a strip and light it. Really? Really? I held it up. It won't light. It's dripping and smoking. He goes, that's a parachute. It's dunked in protective coverage, and that's why it won't catch fire. I mean, that's what this team is about. They have it all up here. And no matter, as we all get older, they're not climbing over fences anymore, these people. They have a little arthritis like I do. But the point is, this is what keeps sharp.
I can't imagine with everybody combined, we're not even talking decades or score. I would think centuries of experience between all 40 members, right? At least one, if not two, I would think.
1,500 years of skill sets.
Wow.
That's what these people represent. And look, we all know crowdsourcing works.
Yes.
This is cop sourcing.
Yes.
My favorite line is when they call me or I get an email and they say, Tom, I know a guy who knows a guy. That's all we need. We don't have to go to court. We don't have to go to a community meeting. We don't have to go to another jurisdiction. These guys in their attics have these old files. They have them on sticks now. And so they can pull up expertise. They can pull up history. That's why we have right now, honestly, we believe, cracked the three biggest cases of mysteries right now. We have Cooper, and Cooper was cracked because we found out that DB Cooper was a CIA pilot, a freelancer, very valuable. He's almost like Gump. He flew the general in the Cambodia incursion. Everybody wanted him. He was a daredevil. And that's when we found out, before and after the hijacking, he had been working for the CIA all the way up into Iran-Contra. And so because of that, we solved that. Well, what does the team do next? They get a tip that somebody tips them to the killer's trail and the actual burial spot of Jimmy Hoffa. Now, it was a deathbed confession. We have the directions to it. Now, we know there are other people with other theories on Hoffa. We know they're digging in New Jersey, but we honestly have sources in 3 separate states that have brought us the same material. And the reason it was secret all these years is because they were cops, corrupt cops, keeping it secret for a mob. And they even cased them, the cops. I mean, it's just insane. And that's how nobody knew about it. Now, we do what cops do. 3 or 4 of my members, ex-cops, they got a van and they went up to the area where it happened. And, they had the hard hats on and the yellow vests, and they're eating foot-long sandwiches sitting in the van. And the cops are waving as they go by. Well, out rolls a ground-penetrating radar machine with a geophysicist. And we were given the exact spot in a 30 to 40 acre lot, open lot. And right at the spot, 5 feet down, you can see straight down to the clay. And after clay, you can't see, but it's 5 feet straight down on the exact spot given to us at the deathbed. So we know that's going to happen, and that is in product. That actually is with in a British company right now, and we are basically setting that one up. The third one, next they find the identity and the of the Zodiac and the actual hideaway. I mean, they're unstoppable.
Yeah, these are 3 cold case mysteries that have literally dominated the interest of not just the United States, but a lot of people around the globe for decades. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple questions about the Hoffa.
Sure.
That way we can go back to DB Cooper, and then let's, stick on Zodiac. You mentioned Tucker Carlson, the Fox News crew doing the originals and stuff like that for Fox Nation. You said New Jersey, which, they've actually shown their ground penetrating radar, which showed like I don't want to say a half moon, but what they think to be the top of a barrel,
Correct.
the can.
Correct.
So where was the location, if you could say, that your tips pointed you to? Was it in New Jersey, another state?
No, yeah, and we're keeping it very quiet, but I will tell you it's in the Great Lakes area.
Mhm.
And I will tell you that the FBI created something called the Hoffex. Hoffex is their code word for the Hoffa project.
Mhm.
And they had all the theories and all the potential locations listed in that. I think it was published just for the FBI senior agents at headquarters. They had a meeting and they fought for 2 months to get permission to dig at the Jersey dump. The dump is not too far away from what you're talking about. And there are thousands of barrels there. And the FBI, after fighting for 2 months to get permission to dig there, decided not to. They were convinced and said, why would they be driving a truck with a barrel 600 miles through roadblocks and take that risk? Everybody else said no. They either went north or they went into the forest or they went into and put it in a chopper. They took the theory of the Jersey location out. Now they have found, I understand, in the past some wise guys buried in that dump. It was owned by a mobster. His son took over it. They're both dead now.
Mhm.
There is a lot of footage, and the footage has been sitting on the shelf for a couple of years. Why?
The people or the witnesses that last saw Hoffa, he was at a restaurant, right? And
Correct.
then was seen getting into a car of two wise guys, right?
Right.
It's presumed that those were the last people that saw him and led him to his demise. If you're allowed to say, do you think those are the people that did him in?
I think there were several people involved. There were different mobs involved.
Mhm.
It was a combined decision to get rid of Mr. Hoffa. At least two, possibly three different divisions of the mafia were involved, different groups. And I will tell you that, as I said earlier, this has to do with corrupt cops.
Yeah.
And the cop on the deathbed who gave the information of the location was he admitted to be casing him before he was killed.
Jeez, wow. Again, this just goes to show you that when you're dealing with mobsters, a police officer, on the outset could be like, hey, he's on your side, law abiding. Oh, if they're on the take, they could be as corrupt as the
Yeah,
worst of the wise
unfortunately.
guys. Uh,
Yeah, unfortunately.
this is going to connect DB Cooper with Hoffa. When you mentioned corrupt cops, did James Comey and his FBI have anything to do with not making sure the DB Cooper was solved, or making sure those 18 pieces of evidence were not brought into history or anything like that? Was there any interference that you noticed?
Well, we were working with the senior staff of James Comey. I don't have the names in front of me right now, but they were all high level. They worked on the seventh floor with James Comey.
Hmm.
James Comey was interviewed by an attorney that we know, and it was, oh, I want to say it was oh gosh, 2019, 18, something, 2018. And the attorney asked James Comey if he had anything to do with the Cooper cover up, the
Hmm.
so-called thing that we're, and he said, I don't get involved in that. Well, then 2 months later, he goes on Mike Wallace's show and he admits the buck stops with him. He was involved with every decision and he stands by them. That said it to me that James Comey obviously knew what was going on. It was for months that they worked on a cover up. And it was not only a cover up of the evidence and pulling out the best pieces of evidence. If anyone has seen the movie, the Killing, what was it called? Killing the Messenger.
Hmm.
Great movie. If they haven't seen it, they should. True story about a reporter at the San Jose Mercury News who gets tipped that they're flying crack cocaine into Los Angeles and other cities in exchange for the guns in the Iran Contra affair. Well, he does a big article, and that's the last article he writes. He's not given a big article again, and sadly, he wound up committing suicide. That is, we have learned that the FBI is tied into all the major media still. It's happened since World War II. Spies are inside the newsrooms. And I don't think it's as great as it used to be, but I'll give you an example. Not only did they spike the news conference and say, we looked at their evidence and there's nothing here, which was a flat out lie. We couldn't get one national TV story. We had 4 shot on all our developments, from the codes breaking, from the parachute. All the local news covered it. I have about 70 newspapers that we work with locally, because we could not get one national story. It was shot 4 times on the journey of Cooper. And each one, every time they called the FBI, we were told by a couple of CBS News people I know, they were told that, hey, we're not going to talk about that man because he's top secret. He's CIA, blah, blah. He was secret CIA in the 1980s, but they were protecting him in 2019. It's silly. Couldn't get one TV story. We couldn't get one national wire. We couldn't get one book review. And by the way, there are 24 D.B. Cooper books. Our team's book, and I'm going to hold this up for everyone, The Last Master Outlaw, has not only 1, but 3 awards for true crime. It's the only book with true crime. It is the highest number of 5-star reviews, over 100, and it has never had a book review. This is all word of mouth. And if you want the true story, this is the team's book. They don't make it up. Enjoy. And this is the 2nd edition with new chapters on how it ended. But that was our frustration. We couldn't get any national. When our D.B. Cooper died in 2019, he died in July, I realized I can't break his death. We were tipped to it. I can't do it here. I've got to go to London. The FBI can't touch us there.
Yeah.
So I leaked it to 2 newspapers there. And sure enough, a British company calls us and says, we absolutely want to do this. I'll never forget the first phone call. In the middle of it, I said to him, look, there's controversy. I can't get any producers on the cable channels here to do it. The FBI keeps telling them not to. They won't work with the channels. We'd like you guys, but if it's too controversial, we could just do the evidence. And I'll never forget the man in charge. He said, with all due respect, Tom, I won't do it unless we can F the FBI. That wasn't me. That was him. And that is a 5-part series coming next summer on a streaming channel. And it's phenomenal. They interviewed, of our 40 members, I think close to 20. They interviewed sources. It's going to be a fabulous show. And again, it's already here if people want to jump at it. But as far as next summer, it's going to be a very exciting time for people to see the truth.
And after we're done live, I will put in the description the links for the books. And if you have a link for the trailer of the 5-part series or where it's going to appear, I'll definitely put them in there. There was a case. Let me just mark it here. This is from Kasan Lee from Sri Lanka. Well, the first part's kind of relevant. He says he missed the DB Cooper part because I'm assuming he got on late. But since we're talking about it, here's his question. Wasn't his granddaughter found a few years back?
His granddaughter there was a kidnapping involving, I don't want to say a kidnapping, but a domestic dispute between one of DB Cooper's children and an adult daughter. It turned out to be nothing. It was a domestic thing for a few months, but somebody is an eagle eye on DB Cooper to know that. It had very little publicity, but everything settled down.
What was the name of the person you found to be DB Cooper? And then let me also say this too, so you could put both things at the same time. What is the official status of the case now with regards to the FBI?
The official name of DB Cooper is Robert W. Rackstraw, 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 and very unusual name. He's British ancestry from his parents. He was a Californian. And when we were tipped to him by a drug runner that knew him, he was working with drug gangs up in Oregon and Washington. And this is after the jump, of course, after he was fired from the military because he was a lieutenant when he came back from Vietnam. Very valuable pilot, as I said. But when he came back, this was a time in the 1970s when an enlisted man was beating a wife or abusing children. They would look the other way. It was a sad period in our military history. That has changed. But when he became a lieutenant, they didn't look the other way on officers. They fired him. He was choking his wife in a sink. And that's when the commander came in and suggested to the wife she needed to divorce this man. And she explained he'd been beating her for 7 years. It was horrible. And that is D.B. Cooper. And that is Robert Rackstraw. And he was booted. That's what we absolutely believe. And we've seen it in FBI memos that the audience can see when they go to the D.B. Cooper part of the case breakers. They can see why he was doing all this and when. It's fascinating.
If I'm not mistaken, the case of the skyjacking, was it 74 the year?
71.
71. Okay. Can you just tell people what we talked about a couple of days ago about the 50-year rule of, with regards to assets and people involved in intelligence?
Yeah, just briefly. John F. Kennedy's file was not released for 50 years. It is a period where it's not set in stone. People can overrule and keep things secret, but it happened with MLK. It happened with, obviously, the gentleman you just mentioned, JFK. And we're getting, next year is the 50th year of D.B. Cooper.
That's what I was asking. So you can finally...
He was flying in Laos, Iran, Nicaragua, and in between, he was a hijacker. He was officially, we believe, with the CIA as a freelance pilot in 72. That's coming up in months. So we're hoping they don't sit on it and make it something deemed national security. There's nothing national about a 50-year-old crime, and there's nothing national about Iran-Contra. We don't care about Iran-Contra. Our argument is, and I hope the audience believes this too, people working in the shadows to protect us, we appreciate them. But what we don't appreciate is when one has 35 criminal titles and 22 fake identities and 6 jobs in 5 countries. This guy was all over the map. He was extremely brilliant. An ADHD kid who didn't get through high school. We even have his report cards from first grade to 8th grade, and it all D's and F's, except for shop and except for mechanics. Those are the 2 things he loved. That's why he became a pilot, and that's why he became working in one of the garages in Vietnam, repairing choppers.
Again, just like you said with his report card, that falls in line with what he was shown to be skilled at as a young person.
Let me add something too. When he was bored in school, he would go to the library, and there were 2 things he found. He found a book on cannons. He decided to take a clay pipe from his dad's construction business. He built his own cannonball. He ordered explosives, and he was firing this cannon in the redwoods of Santa Cruz. Police made him stop. The second thing he did, he found a book on gliders. These are handheld gliders, right? How to make them. He figured out the mathematics to make it a human-sized glider. And he was about to launch, and his mom caught him, and she tied it to the kitchen sink so he couldn't go jump off a cliff. This is Cooper.
There's another question here. This is Sir Wolf 67. I'm going to ask it. Hold on a second. Where did it go? Maybe you know who this person is. It says, what about Ted B. Brannon? Does that name ring a bell to you?
I believe he was, I may be wrong, and maybe they can correct me. I believe he was one of the many candidates of D.B. Cooper. I'm not sure. But there were, look, they just had the 50th gathering of D.B. Cooper up in Washington State. And guess who wasn't invited? Our team. They didn't want us anywhere near them because they all have their own theories. And so the organizer who invited us every year on the 50th, I got the email to invite, and suddenly he calls and says, "No, we can't have you there, Tom." And this was because everybody had their own suspects. Well, here's the bottom line. Our suspect was dead. All the suspects were dead 2 weeks ago. My journey up there was going to be, ladies and gentlemen, you need to use these incredible brains you have to help solve the unsolved crimes around the country, which is what our motivation is now. We have a .org. It's nonprofit. People are now funding the idea, and they're coming in and providing us monies to expand the teams around the country and pay for the expenses. I don't have to tell you what's happening in law enforcement right now, and I like to tell people this, that I had a dad who used to say that there is a lot of moms and dads, but not as many parents anymore. And that's a sad fact that's happening around the country, and that's why police are racing from crime to crime. Many of us grew up in neighborhoods where it would be rare to have a major crime in your street. Now, if you don't, something's wrong.
Yeah.
So that's how it's changed, and because of that, that's why we decided, my wife and I, who have been running this cold case team for 10 years, we did a lot of movies and dramas. The Vow was one of our true stories that became with Channing Tatum. That was a big hit. But we realized, after hearing stats, and the most important 3 stats the audience should know, some of them will not be repeated on television because they're stunning. One of them is, we now have 250,000 unsolved murders in this country.
Wow.
250,000.
Yeah.
250,000. The next stat is, and it deals with the growth is 6,000 a year are added.
Whoa.
6,000. But here's the stat that really scared us and made us redirect to cold case hunting. And that stat is only 5% of departments have cold case teams. 5%. You wonder why it's growing. So when we saw that, and we realized that we could help by bringing in people that retire at 55. And as I said, they can't do the calisthenics maybe as fast as they used to, but you know what? Their brains are incredible. And that's the future. And that's why we just went to a .org so that people can tax donate and say, I want a team in my town. If people want the cop to show up at the door and on a 1-year anniversary and give a report on their missing child, police don't have time to do it. Yeah. We do. This is what our teams can do. If they want phone calls back, this is what the Case Breakers is for. This is how we're going to solve this problem and allow all these volunteers to, in essence, find the dead. And that's what our motivation is.
95% of departments don't even have cold case teams.
They can't afford them. They can't afford them.
That's really sad. Obviously, families never get closure until they get updates of their case. It really kills me to know that so many families, eventually pass away and never knowing answers to what happened to their loved ones. I've even seen some departments where cold case teams exist of 2 people. That's it, 2 people. I mean, it's very sad.
I will tell you 2 quick stories about that. One is one of our members is a senior investigator at South Carolina. The group is called SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Wonderful guy. He's been on our team for almost 10 years. And he told me that, Tom, when we get a murder, there literally is a 24-hour period. If we don't have any leads, it goes into a drawer. And sadly, we never open that drawer again. He said he had a captain come in, and he said once a year, the captain comes in and says, all right, bring me your 10 favorite cold cases. They bring 10. He flips a coin until it's down to 1. That is the one they investigate as a cold case. That's the staffing in South Carolina. And it's not different in many cities. They're all backed up. I mean, Riverside, California, which we're dealing with in the Zodiac case, they have over 250 unsolved cases in that medium-sized town. The other story I want to tell you, and the reason I'm so passionate about it, and is because I married one of my heroes in my stories. She won't see her mom again, was murdered. And unfortunately, the SOB that did it buried her at sea. So she'll never have her closure. And that's why our family is motivated to this. Our children understand she's not only our hero, but she is involved passionately in this effort. And that's why we're here.
There's someone in the chat. Too much information. Everybody out there, he's also on Mind. He goes by TMI MIB. Speaking of cold cases that affect people directly, this is what he wrote. My brother is still a cold case from 1999, 22 years. So clearly, people like that and everyone else can see how you're positively impacting these families. Let me get a couple more things on DB Cooper before we get to the bigger case, the Zodiac. What do you think it's finally going to take for the feds to finally clear this case and just say it's no longer a cold case? We're no longer entertaining theories. So take your evidence of your whole team and look at it and say, hey, guess what? It's cleared. It's solved. No questions, ifs, ands, or buts. We obviously can't try the guy posthumously. We can't. It's pointless to do it as absentia because he's passed away. There's, so
I will tell you, because of the CIA background, that's the reason they have protected this man. He's dead now. And how is it going to solve? I would tell you that if the audience goes to thecasebreakers.org and again go to at the very bottom to Cooper, they will see two last articles in England. And they're on after he died. And you will see memo after memo in the article saying, this is our Cooper. They hid those memos all those years. And of the 150 pages we got on his death file, I would tell you close to 100 are whited out. They're not even, we're not interested in Iran-Contra. We're not interested in Laos or Cambodia. We're interested in the suspect, but they keep them that section whited out. But you can see some of the memos from the agents and saying this man has all the skill sets. It's up on the website and they'll appreciate that.
Speaking of cold cases, Tammy George, another person in the chat, also says, ooh, yeah, my sister-in-law, 2001. That is two people over 20 years, both of them. And it just breaks my heart. This is why the work you're doing is so important.
Thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. And I know everybody's going to be saying the same thing here too. As a matter of fact, they are. I just want to give a shout out to Lou Sheehan. Thank you so much for your super chat. Now, I'm going to tie this with Zodiac real quick. Yeah. You mentioned that when Zodiac was in the military, or essentially that wasn't DB Cooper using the same type of codes that Zodiac was because they were both in the military?
Well, I don't want to blame the military because we have more than a dozen on our team. They're fabulous people. And yes, there are some very smart people that are narcissists. And I will absolutely tell you that Zodiac and Cooper were narcissists. I would argue that the Zodiac was probably a narcissist sociopath because he did such evil. These people that were involved in those crimes, one of them, Zodiac, as we'll learn about in a minute, was in a horrible accident where he almost died. He had brain surgery. And we absolutely believe when they go up to the website we've been talking about, they're going to see there is a particular article that talks about the accident he had and how it affected him. He was in the Air Force. He was brilliant. He had the same code book that DB Cooper had. It was the last version was written in 1950. It's up on the website when they go to DB Cooper. They see that. They can tell them to look under the timeline. It's towards the top of the page, the home page, the timeline. If they go to the very bottom, they're going to see the code book. They can click on it. It was a code book that was designed for troops in the field. All the way back to World War I, they had the code book. And even the Navajos in World War II, you know the famous story.
Yeah.
It's the same code book, just in Navajo language. And that's how they fooled the Japanese. Well, this is the code book that D.B. Cooper and Zodiac both used
Mm-hmm.
for anagrams with the Zodiac and codes with D.B. Cooper.
You
And
know, it's ironic when you were mentioning codes. You obviously mentioned the Navajo. That was the literally the first thing that popped in my mind. I was thinking the Navajo code breakers of World War II, and the reason why we use them, for those of people who don't know, is because not very many people speak their native language. So of course they could encode something and expect the
yes,
Third Reich and Stalin to not be able to understand it. Uh, I also have another super chat. I want to thank you, Rockstar. Thank you so much for your support. Also, Lu Shihan, who I just mentioned a few moments ago, wrote a question here. I'm only going to read it just so you know what it is, but you don't have to answer because we're going to get there. He's saying, who was the Zodiac Killer? And of course, I wrote back in the comment, he's going to be talking about that very soon. So I just wanted to let you know that that is out there. Now, obviously, we have the story before you actually mention the name. So how did you get involved in Zodiac? What was the reason that you picked the case breakers picked up that case?
when my wife and I started this unit
Mm-hmm.
and put together this team, we said if we get one big case, we'll be able to turn into a .org nonprofit so the public can be involved and be our team members,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, well, we now have three of the biggest cases because these guys and gals are not unstoppable. And in that sense, we got tipped by, of all things, a TV anchor.
Mm-hmm.
What was fascinating, the story, his name is Dale Julin, and you'll read about Dale on the website, one of the articles. Dale Julin was approached by one of the Zodiac's partners.
Mm-hmm.
The Zodiac killed 5 people officially, but our information and research in the last year and a half, we believe it's closer to 10. We've noticed the same MO, the same signature at murder scenes from San Diego all the way to Lake Tahoe, the Nevada side. There were people, and in fact, the last one that we're sure was killed is missing. The body's missing. We now know where her body is because of the codes. We translated the Zodiac's codes. And he bragged where he put it. Again, a narcissistic sociopath who's telling you where no one's going to be able to read my stuff. Well, guess what? This anchor, when he got tipped to it, and let's be honest, let me step back a minute.
Mm-hmm.
1970 is when the Zodiac stopped killing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He moved up to a small town in the High Sierra. He met a woman with a child, a woman with a third-grade education, and he took them as cover. They became his so-called family, so no one would suspect him. He moved into a small town, population 300, and he started befriending these wayward 1970s kids up in the town, and I can relate to that age group. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and he gets depending 5 to 10 in his years. This was in the 80s, and he started taking them up in the mountains, giving them guns, and telling them to kill any animal you see. And even one of the kids is mentioned, and there's a coming book on this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the boy was asking him, "Why are we eating these?" And he says, "No, we're not shooting them to eat. We're shooting them for the thrill of it." And there was a moment that same kid watched. He would take them up in the mountains sometimes for a week,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes for a month. He'd go up in the mountains with them, and they'd live off the land and kill anything they found. It was very remote areas up there. Sometimes you don't see people for a day or two up there. It's that lonely. Well, he went up at one point and he asked one of these kids, a teenager, to climb a tree and to hang a cachet
Mm-hmm.
hanging from the branches. In the cachet was meat. And so they left. They come back several days later. And what the kids didn't realize is he also put salmon hooks all over the trunk.
Mm-hmm.
What was there? 3 bears bleeding to death stuck on the hooks. And he pulls out a foldable chair, sits down, and laughs and taunts them for hours. This is the Zodiac. And that's the people I have to understand. He may not have been killing people. Some people think he did kill people later, but he taught them how to kill every type of animal they could shoot. And that's what he did from 1980 till about 2010. That was the period. 30 years, these kids. They're all in their 50s now, and they all realize, most of them now that the truth is coming out, I'll be honest, there are about 10 members in this small town who are shaken. And he had a cover as a painter. He was a union painter for 40 years with a partner. And he would do his crimes. He'd go up in the mountains. And this was his cover all those years. He never went to a funeral. He never went to a wedding. When he went to the market, he made his wife go get the food. He stayed off the grid for 40 years.
You mentioned how he was teaching this group how to kill anything and everything of animals. We know psychologically people like Edward Kemper, Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, these are just two. Yeah, they, as children growing up, or even as adults before they graduated to, killing and dismembering humans, they all started with killing birds, cats, rats, whatever.
Magnifying glasses and ants, you remember, as kids.
Yeah, only they took it up way to another level. Jeffrey Dahmer will find roadkill, and I mean, it's just bizarre. But the makings of a psychopath. Now, obviously, he's a narcissist Zodiac killer, because, like you said, he absolutely bragged. And anybody who commits a crime and then decides to send a coded letter to the media, I mean, you're only asking for attention in the wrong sense of the word. Unfortunately, he wasn't stupid enough back then for us to catch him by using this coded messages. Now, why do you think that the police departments investigating Zodiac never thought to look at the coded messages, looking at the military to see how they break codes? I mean,
I think that's a very interesting question, because it happened with Cooper too. The FBI didn't translate the codes and the Zodiac. But what's very important to understand about this code book, you have to know the group you're talking to, or you have to study them. And I'll give you an example. In Vietnam, when they were in their foxholes and they were hiding in the jungles, or they were in a particular unit, they spoke the language of the war. For example, in Vietnam, everybody knew what a Phantom jet was. Everybody knew what bungee sticks were. Everybody knew the language of a soldier in that battle. Same in World War I, World War II, all the way up to Vietnam. So Rackstraw had a language. He could write codes to his partners that were also veterans from the same group. Go back now to Zodiac. This news anchor, God bless this guy, he came to us and asked for our help, but he had translated all 19 of the letters, and most of the letters, I should say. He translated them because he studied the language of the Zodiac, his taunts, his ego, his narcissism, so that when he figured out how to solve the puzzle, he was able to understand that language. Now, we've had people in Cooper and in Zodiac reach out to us saying, I looked at what you translated and I can see, square pants. What's the old character, Bob Square Pants?
Yes.
I looked at the code and I read square pants. I didn't read what you wrote. Well, they weren't talking about square pants in Vietnam.
I know,
the language of the individual. And that's what this TV anchor did. He translated all this, and he literally found the last location of the missing person because he followed his directions. You turn down this road and that road, all of it. He was able to translate it. Fascinating.
I want to give another shout out to Alex Owie and Under the Veil. Thank you, Alex, for your super chat and your support. And by the way, anybody out there, if you want to ask questions regarding Zodiac, please put them in caps. And if it's relevant, I will definitely ask them to Mr. Colbert. Tom, let me ask you this. The trove of evidence that you found on Zodiac.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you came upon that, and more importantly, what was in it.
Yeah. I want to start with Riverside because
Mhm.
understand that we're going from, as I mentioned, 10 some odd victims
Mhm.
in multiple cities. So we started quietly a year and a half ago, going from town to town. We started in Oceanside in San Diego. We're still working on Riverside, Santa Barbara, Lake Tahoe. None of these were considered murders similar to Zodiac until our team got involved and realized the similarities. And so that's what we're in the middle of. Well, when we got to Riverside,
Mhm.
Riverside was a fascinating case. Cherry Joe, and I can't remember her last name right now. Cherry Joe Bates. Thanks, honey.
Mhm.
I got my left hand
Yeah,
elbow
the
here. She's
technical
out
survivor. Yeah.
there.
What
So
did you say again? Can you say the name again so I can
Bates
write it real
is
quick?
the name. Cherry Joe Bates.
Cherry Joe Bates. Got it.
She was a co-ed at a junior college in Riverside.
Mhm.
And she was found outside the library about 10 o'clock at night, 41 stab wounds and almost decapitated. It's horrible. And they looked at the scene, and they next month, 1 month exactly later, they get a typed letter from the killer of Cherry Joe. And they know it was because the chief said he only knew information a killer would know. And they can see that up at the website at casebreakers.org at the bottom. Go to Zodiac. Tell your audience to go to the Zodiac. There are 50 some odd pages, and you will see that typed letter. It's horrible on how he described it, and that's why they knew he did it. Now, was it the Zodiac? We believe so because we have found 6 pieces of evidence at her murder scene that make sense. Our Air Force man who left the Air Force in 63. He left in 63, started killing, became a painter, and he was working, and then he moved up to the mountains. What was intriguing about his movement is that he took all this information from the Air Force and used it to communicate. And he was writing taunting letters to the authorities, but at the same time, having secret messages that could be translated. That is how Dale did it. He translated those things and was able to find the last victim up at Lake Tahoe, the location. We believe he moved her at the last moment. We believe she's now in the High Sierra, and we have a very good idea where it is.
Do you think the reason that she was moved was because that he possibly thought someone was going to stumble on the body and therefore decided to move it?
You
Yeah.
said it. There is a campground next door for trailers
Mhm.
and for mobile homes, and that had just been started. And he had we believe, put the bones in the tree. If anybody has seen the card that the Zodiac sent dealing with Halloween,
Mhm.
they've seen the Halloween card. There is a hole in a tree. Well, that particular hole, you're going to see on the Dale Julin article on the homepage, you're going to see the tree that it was marked at, and there was an X at the bottom. And so we believe he moved the body up into the High Sierra.
Let me give another shout out here. Gigi Abby Lynn, thank you as well for your super chat and your support. I want to thank everybody in the audience today. You've been really, really kind in your support and your comments. And actually, Tom, this was directed as you too. She writes, a great show, Tom and Dr. J. Thanks. So they're
Lovely. Thank
definitely
you.
really engaged. That's the great part. I got your first question here. This might go back a few minutes about this victim, but let me read it. This is Alex Oyen under the veil. He says, were the stab wounds always a close number? Wait, does that make sense? Were the stab wounds always a close number, or did they vary between the 5 known and the possible 28 or more people possible? Let me see if I can read that again. There might be some spelling errors. Alex, if this doesn't make sense, if you could please put this question again. I'll read it again if this doesn't make sense. Let me go again. Were the stab wounds always a close number, or did they vary between the 5 known and the possible 28 or more people possible?
I will tell you that he choked people, he stabbed people, he shot people. He literally wrote it on one of the a couple's car, a lovers lane couple. He wrote, the dates of when he stabbed somebody. They can see that online if they punch up the Zodiac Killer and put in stab wounds or stab, they will see that pop up and they can see the car door. They literally took the car door as evidence, and there's his writing on it with a marsalot. Yeah, it's a horrid subject, but important to discuss.
It really is, because I mean, this case, of course, we have Ted Bundy. Well, tried, convicted, sentenced to death. Same thing with Dahmer. Tried,
Right.
convicted, killed by a cellmate. This is one of those sad cases that the guy got away, and now that
Right.
he's found dead, the California, was it the Strangler, right? California Strangler. He was found 35 years after he stopped committing his crimes, and the point is it's just sad that this guy did escape justice. So at least that you providing the answers to the families now is more than they've ever had in 50 years on this case. Here's another one for you. This is, he's rewriting the question. Let me just read it this new way he wrote it. This is again Alex Owen. Were the number of stab wounds a consistent number? But then he says, but you just answered it. Okay, so
Yeah.
I guess that part is fine. Now, you said there was 10 victims. Because after he stopped killing, you said that he was taking these groups of kids to kill animals and things like that. Did he essentially want to form a cult? Did anyone follow him in the line of murdering people? Did any of these people?
Well, that is an interesting subject. There are reports and rumors, and I only call it reports and rumors because my team is so very careful about revealing information that hasn't been substantiated. There are rumors that he continued killing, and those are things that we have a particular lake up in the 7,000 foot level in the Sierra, where we have a witness who saw him bury the murder weapons. And we are planning to chop her up there next summer. We have a forensic team already set, anthropologist and a DNA expert and a CSI expert. It'll be a crime scene in the High Sierra to look for a container that he put the weapons, 22s and 9mm, in there.
And I'm assuming knife too, maybe stabbing knives?
Could be. We don't know. He saw it. He was probably 50 yards from the site he was burying, but he watched it. This is the whistleblower that ran. His name is Will. And again, you'll see him at the bottom of the homepage of the casebreakers.org under the video section. Will is wearing a hat. He talks. He's now in his 50s. Well, he was the one that claims to have witnessed him. He talks about the horrible things he would do to animals. He would literally put his arms all the way up to the elbows inside the animals as he would gut them or clean them. And again, he would not for food. It was just, and we have photos. He was a photo bug. There are literally I want to say thousands of photos that he shot. There is one in particular where he sits at a tree. This is we call it the shrine. This tree has been stripped of its bark and it's raw tan, and it's very soft. So you could take a knife and write letters. He turned this into the Halloween card. The ghost is flying there. There is at the bottom is boo in big letters, like the letter. So unless somebody is another Zodiac, we believe that this was the place. He even took a picture of himself at the tree, and it was, a timer, and he sat there, and then he took one more picture. The sun is going down. He's at the tan part with the boo down here and the flying ghost, and he's there, and he puts the hood back on involved in the Zodiac murder at the lake. He literally put it on. Now, it's a silhouette. You can
Hmm.
see the silhouette of it. He shot it as the sun went down. Amazing. And those are things. And here's something else your audience should know. And this is something we've just learned. There is about an hour of footage of the Zodiac in the High Sierra with his criminal posse.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Wow!
Yeah.
That's
Going
that's
lake to lake. It's on video, VHS, and that is going to be phenomenal. We have right now, Dr. J, I have a wonderful man named Michael London. He's been with us 10 years as a manager. And Michael been doing this a long time. And he said, in 40 years, I've never seen such interest in a case. 40, well, let me say 20 to 30, closer to 30 now, producers wanting to be our partner on Zodiac around the world. But we've narrowed it down to two.
hmm.
Two networks want it for history. They said, we don't need a middleman. We have producers. We want it. So we are now making a decision on Zodiac because of that footage. It's going to be one of these two networks that's going to own the history. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, absolutely. And I know everybody here is going to be watching it, as will I. I kind of wish we had like a way to speed up time for that, because I know productions take
Oh yeah,
quite
that's
some
going to
time.
be another year.
This is a question. It's more broad. It's not necessarily on Zodiac, but I'm going to read it anyway to you. This is from Casson Lee from Sri Lanka. It says, anything on John Lennon killer, please? Was he a CIA Manchurian candidate?
Haven't heard anything like that ever. No, I haven't heard that.
In the 60s and 70s, unfortunately, unlike today, when people went missing, well, sadly, even today, when someone goes missing, they don't process the scene as a homicide. Usually it takes weeks, months, and by that time you lose evidence. But the good thing is where we are today,
Yeah.
unless you have someone who's a runaway or a homeless, when someone goes missing, people tend to pay attention and we notice things. But in the 60s, 70s, I don't want to say 80s, but definitely 60s and 70s and before that, there are cases where people went missing and no one noticed. So do you think well, of course there's a possibility, but do you think there's a strong possibility, in your own opinion, that there may have been more victims that we never knew about because they were never reported missing, they were killed, and then possibly disposed of in such a way where no one even noticed there was a crime scene?
Dr. J, are you talking about the Zodiac?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he claimed to have killed the figure I'm trying to remember in the 30s or 40s. I
Yeah, a
mean,
lot more than
somebody
what
even
he
said
found.
71. Somebody said 17.
Hmm.
I have no doubt there are other people, and
Yeah.
I will tell you, we have identified with our team murders from 62 through 70, and then he officially stopped. Two of the years don't have victims, and that's
Hmm.
65 and 67. This guy is such a perfectionist and such a detail man. I have no doubt that there are two at least in 65 and 67. He killed someone each year. There was one year that he killed two, and that was, I believe, 69. He had a disagreement. Some people said it was a drug deal with
Hmm.
a taxi cab driver. Stein is his name, and he was killed in a cab. There was another killing that year, and that was, we have affidavits from
Hmm.
our Zodiac. He was in jail for the last 2 years because he had abused his wife, violent abuse. And for the last 2 years, he was in a jail cell. And two of his jail roommates, his jail cell folks in the same cell, he befriended them, and they befriended him, and he admitted that was personal when he killed the cab driver. And by the way, when before he left the cell, he confessed to these two jail cell brothers in that particular holding tank.
Wow. So
Yeah.
that's the closest
And
we've
those
ever
are
had.
affidavits, they're court affidavits of those guys talking and saying he admitted killing Stein, he admitted killing the gal in Tahoe.
Hmm.
He wrote poetry about it. They saved the papers. They were given to Dale Julin. Julin has not only the affidavits, he has the actual writings of the Zodiac bragging about his victims from the jail.
Why did they do nothing about them then? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. Why, if you have an inmate, whether even if it's not even a prison, but let's just say it's in a, drunk tank or maybe awaiting trial or something minor, where you're in a temporary cell in jail, and this person is spilling beans to his cellmates about something very active and major. Unless there's some other motivation to bury it, it boggles my mind why a good investigator would not follow up on those,
Well,
leads.
well, you and I say that, but we also have to understand we have a memo from the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's on the location. They can look at the Zodiac. There is a memo there that is signed by every agent in charge up and down California. And the memo, and I'm paraphrasing, says, we're only going to help the local departments with fingerprinting and lab work, but we're not going to get involved in the murders. Now, you may wonder why. The reason was these small town police departments not only had egos, but politics, and the FBI didn't want to get in the middle of this task force. So they kept their distance. But the FBI, when our man ran away,
Mm-hmm.
our young man ran away at about 40 years old in about 2010, that's when the town heard the stories. And when he ran away, they went to the police department, and the police department didn't believe him and said, "We don't believe this guy." And Dale Julin was with him, and he said, "We don't believe this. This is too crazy. This is wild." But here's the interesting insight. In the book from Dale Julin, he verified through locals that the
Mm-hmm.
FBI did show up in the town. They asked questions.
Oh.
They actually approached the Zodiac, and he fooled them. And what he did when he was arrested for his wife's abuse, when
Mm-hmm.
he was in town and met the FBI, and this was 2014, not too long ago.
Yeah.
He was in his late 70s. He pretended dementia.
Whoa.
He couldn't remember who he was. There was a moment when he had heart surgery in Los Angeles. They drove him all the way down for it. His stepson was in charge of his estate and his medical care. When he heard they took him down from jail after beating his wife, he's in jail, and they took him down for heart surgery. He shows up all the way down in court in Los Angeles, says, no, he always wanted to die. He doesn't want any medical help. He's never been to a doctor. And so, well, let's ask him. So what did they do? They go and they get a ethical committee to decide, should this man have his heart surgery or not? Well, they sit the stepson down across from him.
Mm-hmm.
The doctors say, Mr. Post, Gary Francis Post, this is your stepson. He says that you don't want surgery. Is that true? And he looks at his stepson and goes, I don't know who he is. And the stepson said, you son of a bitch. I came all the way down here from Northern California, and you're pulling this. That stepson never spoke to him in person again until he died.
Wow. I know I asked you this a couple of days ago, but of course it's relevant that everybody hears this publicly. We do know that people like, definitely Ted Bundy, and I'm assuming others, specifically him, when he got arrested for the final time in Florida, and he had a phone call with his ex-girlfriend Liz I think she was in Washington State. Point being is when he essentially described why he was in prison, and without saying the word murder, and I killed these people, and I am sick, and have these other things, he basically said to her something along the lines of, is that I am sick, and she says sick like alcoholic sick, and he said, essentially using that as comparison, he said it's like he couldn't take another drink. meaning that if he was out in the public, he couldn't stop himself from killing again.
Right, right,
That's almost universal with serial killers.
right.
Why wasn't it with Zodiac?
Well, I will tell you that some of the posse members, the criminal posse members, still love the man because they
Mm,
raised him as a second dad.
mhm,
They didn't learn about his killings being Zodiac until 2014. We have about 10 people in that town who, God bless them, are still suffering after hearing that information. There is that this little town not only doesn't have an attorney, which is probably a good thing,
mhm. Yeah,
but
I know, right?
there's no doctor. They have to travel a half hour to get medical care. And so when that news came out in 2014, uh, I've been told that some of these people, men and women in their 40s and 50s, they started sleeping in the closets. They started sleeping on their couches. It freaked them out, and they still haven't had care. And one of the things we're doing for our investigation, and whichever network we decide with, I'm
Mhm,
the son of a shrink. My dad was a psychiatrist, and we're absolutely going to get them. I've already got a guy who's the former psychiatric director of Northwestern University. He's
mhm,
agreed to come in to be there not only for their interviews and watch them, but to have a private session with them. And he's going to bring them packages for mental health issues so that they can get care. This is a town that is struggling. Half the town thinks he was a wonderful painter.
mhm.
The other half has learned the truth. It's fighting itself, the town right now. It's an amazing thing that's going on. But I feel for these people and those in the audience that have their own family members missing, murdered. We can relate to that. That's one of the reasons mental health is so important. And we're making sure on our cases that we tread very, very carefully.
Uh, were there, I believe there was at least one, but maybe you could clarify for this for me. Were there any survivors of Zodiac's attempt to kill that? So there were two. And were any of those alive, or are they still alive? And if so, were you ever able to approach them and show them a picture and be like, is this the guy?
I will tell you that other than the town, we are keeping as a distance from the witnesses. Now,
Hmm.
the witnesses are getting to be in their 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
For example, there's a wonderful man who witnessed uh, Donna Lass, the nurse in Tahoe, having a drink allegedly with the Zodiac.
Hmm.
And this was her roommate who showed up at a casino where she was a nurse. She was on a break and she's sitting with a man she had met in San Francisco. He looked at the photos we showed him of our Zodiac and he said, that's the guy. And
Hmm.
so he's in his 70s. We sat down with him. He's still sharp. And he confirmed what we had heard from others that he had driven all the way from San Francisco to come after her. It was an interesting story, and they'll read about that.
Yeah, obviously, and they'll be able to watch when these things come out to documentaries. Uh, Let me also ask you. Well, you said that half the people. Why do you think the people, that half the town that thinks he was a great house painter, is kind of being oblivious to the evidence? I mean, I could see why if I had an impression of someone as being this maybe a friend or I wouldn't say friendly that I didn't quite know but knew about him, seen him around town painting homes and things and sort of being quiet, and that's the impression I had of the guy for decades. But then I find out that this person led a double life, was, according to the town, the worst person that had ever been raised there, killed 10 people minimum that we know of. I don't know if I could look at that person the same way. I mean, these are these people just oblivious, or because, like you said, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is that they're kind of set in their ways, or is it more of a psychiatric defense mechanism where they don't want to accept the truth?
Boy, you've brought up about six good points, and I will tell you that there's probably a little of everything. You would have to sit down with 100 people and
Yeah.
figure out why. I would tell you, I've been involved. We now have about 10 folks that had no idea someone in their family was a killer. And when
Yeah.
it comes out, it is a lifetime versus 1 week. In other words, they get a news and it's in the papers for a week, and then they're thinking about the 70 years, the 69 years they knew him. You know, it is a difficult thing for all victims who have a murder in a family. Every one of them has different reactions.
Hmm.
There are commonalities. There are things that there's the anger, there's the rejection, there's the depression. Those are various stages, and hopefully they can find a place. Um, I'm very concerned that we don't have people knocking on doors every year anymore. I
Yeah.
brought this up earlier. We don't have people when they phone, they don't answer the phones or they don't return calls because they're frankly too busy with crime.
Hmm.
Forget about the Proud Boys and Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all that. The anger in communities we're hearing about, where they are just furious, they're not getting resolutions.
Hmm.
That is what's building with this 250,000 unsolved murders. That is what we're tackling right now. And that's why we must multiply these teams. And so I tell people, please consider getting involved with this great effort, because if we don't, it's going to, I don't want to even imagine what it could happen. We can't let this keep going.
And after we're done, when I ask you for proper links to put in there, if you have a link for people to join, and remember, I offered this to you a few days ago. Any person that I've ever interviewed that's involved in federal law enforcement, anything of the such that can help, I would definitely be more than happy to bring these things
Thank
to
you.
their attention. I mean, it's you're doing such and this is God's work. I mean, really, and as you mentioned, the frustration in communities. Yeah, that's really what it always boils down to, because who doesn't want justice, especially when someone loses a family member? And then, because police and especially investigators, it's always a one-way road with them. They get the information from you, but so their case is not sabotaged or ruined, they're not going to really tell you anything back until things are resolved in a court. If things don't even get to a court, you may literally never really know what's going on. And that frustration and anger just builds over time.
I will. Let me add to that if I can, Dr. J. The issue is law enforcement is so overwhelmed.
Hmm.
If we can take a little work off their backs, that is the benefit here. We're there to help the families recover, but if it helps open up a little extra time for law enforcement to deal with the crimes that are ongoing, that's fabulous, and that's what we're about. Yes, the departments are a little nervous about us. They don't haven't gotten to know us, but that's why we've put in marshals, police officers, FBI, military. They're all there, forensic experts, academia is involved,
Hmm.
CSI experts. They are there for the departments. And frankly, the bigger the departments, the more politics you run into. We have teams of 2 to 3 people out in the
Hmm.
field working in a small town on a murder. That doesn't get publicity. We've had this team for 10 years. People don't understand that. We face, Dr. J, all these, these very smart people that have their own theories, as you know.
Hmm.
And whether they're Zodiacers or they're Cooperites or they're Hoffadites, they have all these little fiefdoms and they say this is it, and they're all wrong. How did they explain 40 volunteers? We're not in it for fame and fortune. We're in it to help the families, and we want them to join us. Their brains are incredible. Their knowledge is incredible. They should be involved with this.
Yeah, especially if they have so many years experience, that's what makes their brain so valuable. And another thing too is a detective that's fairly young, that's coming to, whether it be LAPD, whatever it be, federal, the point is the way of thinking and the technology has changed police work considerably.
Exactly. Good
So
point.
that's why we need the old to mix with the new, because there are investigative techniques that the new don't even know about.
Exactly. And you know, the old veterans that kept us safe as we grew up,
Hmm.
uh, they have nothing to be ashamed of because the technology didn't exist back then. It exists now. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm learning, you're learning, our age group, because these kids are phenomenal. I mean, we're hearing reports and we're also into recruitment. We want
Hmm.
young people to get involved in public safety. I don't care if it's Peace Corps, I don't care if it's a ranger, I don't care if it's law enforcement. They need to serve the public. It's such a joy. You don't always have to duck bullets. There are a lot of jobs you can do,
That's true.
and that's the future of our young people, to bring them in on these cases. And what's happening in the boot camps and the various training facilities for law enforcement is
Hmm.
you got these kids who are 20 to 25 who have a specialty, whether geospatial or abilities to locate people through satellites and so forth. Uh,
Hmm.
that's they're becoming detectives in their 20s,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
where the old detectives had to have hunches until they were 40.
That's true.
and
That's
and
true.
these kids in their 20s are now partnering up with people in their 50s and 60s in a car, going on a detective thing. That's exciting, and that brings whole energy. We've also heard that there was a particular crime con event. Crime
Hmm.
con is a fascinating gathering, and one of our members went there, and she told me that I think it was like 2/3 of the audience. I believe the number. I may be wrong. About 4,000 people there.
Hmm.
2/3 of the crowd were women wanting to be cops,
Wow.
and I love that.
Yeah, of course.
If you had a strong mom who told you what to do, you can understand why that might translate. Maybe they're a little softer. Maybe they're able to delegate and negotiate.
Hmm.
Rather than somebody pulling out a billy club, let's have a negotiation. But they can be just as tough, as we know that with mothers.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's fascinating to see the shifts, and I suggest to women to consider it.
Well, that's what I think one of the best things about living today. You mentioned how a lot of the younger people are, riding along with the older because they have to share ideas. And, you have men, women, and old and young that are playing an active role these days. A lot of people, as you know, because of the, so much things on the internet, people being able to connect across the world, kind of like what we're doing, even though we're not very far from each other. This has changed things where we have literally armchair detectives globally. I mean,
Yeah.
it's I don't. Did you ever get a chance to watch the Tiger King series by any chance?
No, I didn't, but I
Okay,
heard a lot
well,
about it.
yeah, I know the world did. Really, they did season 2 not long ago. It's finally released, and there is a missing person that goes
Hmm.
back to the 90s because of the popularity of that show. There are not only did the police reopen the investigation for this missing person, you
Hmm.
have thousands of armchair sleuths working on this case. So that's what the benefit of bringing things to the public consciousness. Now,
And
let me
that reminds me of Don't F with Cats. You heard about
Yeah.
that show
Oh,
too.
of course. That same thing. That was all
Hey,
done by people who saw it. And
now you see why the idea of a 40-member team, and if we expand it to every state, this is going to be, no one's going to be able to stop this group. And that's why
yes,
people need to get involved in this. It's the way to go.
I about Post.
Hmm.
Uh, where is he buried?
Ashes were spread over the high
Oh,
Sierra.
jeez. Okay.
Yeah, I
The
know.
reason why I was asking is that means, does he have any living relatives?
Oh, yes, he does. But you should understand, and the audience should understand, we got a tip 2 weeks ago. And some of his best friends and neighbors and people in town that he liked, two
Mm-hmm.
years before he died in 2018, he distributed all his guns.
Mm-hmm.
He handed off the shells, the full bullets, the gunpowder. He gave it to all his buddies. And we got a call, and they didn't know what to do with it. It's sitting in their closets in their attics. And so we got 2 huge boxes and over 1,000 bullets, 24 different caliber guns,
Wow.
all the parts of the weapons. But one of the most valuable things that came with it was a mat. It was a hiker's mat that he slept on in the mountains for 30 years. And the best
Wow.
part of the mat, it's a blow up mat. DNA.
Yeah. I was that. Okay.
We
So
now
now.
have 3 labs working on the forensics of the bullets. There is a specialty lab in Salt Lake City where they specialize in pulling DNA off of bullet shells. They can even pull it off of rocks now. The DNA efforts have just exploded because of the technology. And so we have the mat. I have the person that has developed exclusively the shell casing, pulling
Mhm.
DNA off of it, is Francine Bardol. And Francine is phenomenal. She's one of 3 labs that's working with us to solve this mystery. So the audience should stay listening, because we may be not only do we have the DNA, we have DNA to compare it to him.
Yeah. You.
Not only the hairs, when it happened in Riverside, they found 4 hairs in her hand, the victim, and God bless that coroner. He takes the hairs, put them in a container in a refrigerator in 1966. They sat there until DNA came around. They have
That
cleared
that
3
was
people.
really
They,
smart of him
yeah,
to
they've
think.
cleared 3 people with it.
Yeah.
And
The fact that he put it on ice long before we invented or
yeah,
we had the concept of figuring out DNA.
somebody who knew the future. And my
Exactly.
point is, that's the only DNA left on the case. But we have other DNA. For
Mhm.
example, the murder scene. I want to make sure your audience knows there's 6 pieces of evidence there. The shoe print in the ground was a short military shoe, short heel, and it was size 10. Size 10 military shoe was spotted at 3 Zodiac scenes in the next 2 years.
Oh.
Next is a watch was ripped off his arm. That watch had paint spots on it. Well, he was a 40-year painter. He was undergoing treatment for an injury at March Air Force Base nearby. He was 15 minutes away from the murder scene, multiple trips to this base. And finally, we have learned on that watch, the leather strap has DNA. And so we're going to be able to see, we believe, with the help of the FBI and with the help of Riverside, if they turn it around, we're going to be able to compare.
You actually answered and because I'm sure you were able to foresee what I was going to ask when I asked you about, where he was buried, was so I could ask you if you can get DNA. But then you showed how you did get the DNA, and the reason I was asking was to compare to, the murder scene, or when you investigate the weapons and things like that, which I think would actually really close the case at that point. You mentioned though those hairs. Was that because the woman, you know, in a struggle tried to yank his hairs? Is that kind of?
She not only yanked them, she pulled it right out of the hair, right out of the skull. One of them
Ooh,
has a blood clot on it. That's how
ouch.
tough she was. She was an athlete, fought tremendously, and it was in the hand, and they didn't know it till they brought her into the coroner's office and they pulled back the fingers, rigor mortis by then, and there were the hairs, and one of them with a blood clot on it. That has been at Riverside all this time. And the audience can read about Riverside, the challenges we've had to get them to cooperate. It's again, politics and egos and other things involved.
I know we Ken talked about this 2 days ago, but I want to, and we also mentioned it today. But before we went, I wanted to talk about this again because I still try to wrap myself around how he was able to essentially just stop. the killing on demand and go on with his life for a few more decades before he passed away. When he wrote that final letter to the press, obviously the final letter was basically saying, I'm done, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the reason for him to write that was because if I'm not mistaken from what you told me, was because they were onto him. Is that why he just didn't want to get caught? And so he said, okay, I'm going to stop.
He was very clever, but I think at some point he realized that the game was not going to be able to go on forever. Now he wrote letters later. Some people believe they're later letters, and you can find them on some of the websites for Zodiac, where he talks about things in town, and not his town, but San Francisco and the old days. Um, no, he I think he realized that he could not really continue doing this. Technology was coming around.
Mm-hmm.
They were getting familiar with his habits.
Mm-hmm.
But so when he met this woman with the child, that was to disassociate him from the lone killer,
Yeah.
which is, when you think about it, it's a brilliant thing. And that's how he was able to hide all those years.
You know, I know you know this too. Surprisingly, serial killers, a lot of them have extraordinarily high IQs.
Yes.
Ed Kemper has an IQ, depending on which IQ test he had with the standard deviations. One was 136, the next one was 143. The highest of the bunch is Kaczynski, 167. I mean, this is Stephen Hawking,
Yeah.
IQ. And then everyone else, Ted Bundy, all of them fall into that category. I'm guessing, Post, aka Zodiac, clearly was a highly intelligent
Yeah.
person as well.
Yeah. If we could wrap this up soon, I
Yeah,
want to
no, I
wrap
was
it
I
up
was
with
gonna say I'm
I want to
getting
wrap
about
it up
done.
soon, but I want to tell you a little about Post. Post grew up in New York. He
Hmm.
has a couple of brothers still alive in their 80s, and they're not cooperating with anybody who's approaching. And by the way, we are not approaching witnesses on this case until we have a documentary in place.
Hmm.
Uh, this is an expensive business, and that's where we get it from our partners, and that's what we hope we can provide in the near future. But I will tell you that he was off the scales, just like Rackstraw. They were brilliant people. The Zodiac was part of the early warning Russian system, where we had radar stations all up in the north of our country watching
Hmm.
for missiles coming over Canada. It
Hmm.
was all lined up, and he was in Indiana. And as I said, there's a fascinating article on the homepage on Indiana and his time there. But it was the accident that really changed him. He was with a buddy from New York, both in the Air Force. They slammed into a tunnel wall of a railroad. His buddy driving died.
Hmm.
He had major injuries in his chest, his head, his skull. They had to remove every tooth to save him, to go in. And so he has scars on his forehead that your people will see. If you look at the sketch in San Francisco in 1968, you're going to see those scar marks.
Hmm.
And it was spotted not only by three children in a window, no more than maybe 20 yards away. A cop was stopped and slowed down and looked at the man wearing the glasses. All of them helped mark the scars. We have articles on the website, 1959, the accident,
Hmm.
documenting what happened to him, quotes from people that how it changed him. What really changed him when he came back to the base after all his injuries were, taken care of, and he's coming back. What's parked out in front? The crashed Jeep.
Oh,
Don't,
wow.
don't drink and drive. Every day he had to see that. So he demanded a new station. Well, they hated him so much. Where did they send him? The loneliest station in the world on the radar system, and that is on the ice, a single man unit on Greenland.
Wow.
And that's where we believe he lost his mind.
Yeah, clearly isolation. Mr. Colbert, I want to thank you so much. A couple final things. I know I'm going to put the links in for everything, but if you want to go ahead and talk about the book and everything else that people are going to see in the links. And if you have anything, like if you want to say they could buy the book on Amazon before I place the link, by all means, now's your time to say anything like that. And if there's any final statements you want to say about any of the 2.5, 3 cases we talked about, Hoffa, DB Cooper, and Zodiac, and then finally hang around for a quick second after we end.
Sure, sure. And look, I want to thank everybody that's listening tonight. This is such an important night. I really appreciate the personal stories we heard. It reminds me, when I met my wife, I was so impressed with not only her beauty and smarts, but her sense of justice. And I know a lot of you are seeking justice. That's encouraging to us, that we have a mission to continue. That mission should continue long after I'm gone. There should be volunteers like the Minutemen and women of the revolution. They have to step up. You have to step up. You have to get people to help and help us expand these teams across the country. It's not going to be Uncle Sam, folks. There's not enough tax dollars in the world to fund more cops. And that's why we have to use people in their 50s and 60s where their brains are smart. They're the ones that are going to help you. They're going to help us. And we're going to be able to get a handle on this in the future. And that's what we're excited about. That's what this nation's about. I will tell you, if you want, as I said earlier, if you want the true story of DB Cooper, you absolutely should get The Last Master Outlaw. And we have a famous line: if you don't have a great read, your money back. And we haven't had one. It's an incredible book. And it's not because of me. It's Tom Solisey, the co-writer. It's the team in here that edited it. All the FBI guys got in this. There are 50 pages of footnotes in here. You know it's the truth. So please enjoy the book. Please take care of yourself, and God bless.
Amen to that. Let me give a shout out again to Lou Sheehan, Rockstar, Alex Oyen, and Gigi Abby Lynn. Thank you so much for your super chats, everyone. Also, I've put the link for minds.com, the referral link, throughout the chat. It'll also be in the description. If you don't have a Minds account, please open one up. I've lost over 140,000 followers on Twitter and Instagram when they shut down my social media. So I encourage everybody to go to the only free speech platform left. Also, you all enjoyed the Linda Moulton Howe that I played for you not long ago. If you all are very interested in hearing old interviews that have never been posted or archived, let me know and I will continue to put them out. Also, I want to thank you, Alex Oyen, for yet another super chat. Now, with that being said, I'll catch you all on the flip side. I plan on having something for you in the next couple of days, maybe sooner. All you have to do is just pay attention to Minds, or as long as you hit notifications here, you will get them. With that being said,
Dr. J, I want to thank you personally again for bringing us on. This was wonderful. And thecasebreakers.org, 3 words, that's where you can go and read more about this. And we'll keep you, Dr. J, abreast of how the events are happening in the next year. There's going to be some excitement.
Oh, absolutely. And I can't wait to speak to you again. And neither do these people wait to hear from you again and see you again. And also, of course, from what I'm reading, also, you might have seen some of the comments, they are eagerly awaiting for the production. With that being said, thank you all, fine folks. Mr. Colbert, hang by for a second. And now we are officially ending the live stream.